Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us for this first session of our two-part series on understanding and assessing data quality. The second part will take place next Wednesday on the 15th of November at 11 a.m. Pacific time. I'm Beruz Kaviani, and I'll be your moderator. And our two speakers are Mr. David Coder and Mr. Michael Kano. Just before we begin, quickly a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, and right after, we will be emailing you with the recording and the PDF slide deck. As well, the webinar will be visible off our website at Analytics Software if you'd like to go there anytime. And allow 3 to 4 days, and you should also receive the certificates with your CPE credits. By design, all attendees are in listen-only mode, but please don't let that stop you from sharing your questions with us. As you'll see the top right area, there's a little icon with a question mark on it. When you click on there, you'll be able to submit your questions. And at the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session, and we will do our best to get through all of those questions. And anything that's missed, we will make sure to follow up with you. As I said, I'm your moderator, Beruz Kaviani. I've spent pretty much most of my career in the software and technology industry, and I've spent more than half of that leveraging technology to design and deliver and implement data analytics solutions for folks such as yourselves across our North American and EMEA markets. Our first esteemed speaker is Mr. David Coder, the Chief Data Analyst at Rivera and CEO at CATS. Dave is an expert in the development and use of data analytics for fraud risk assessment, testing of internal controls, and continuous monitoring. Dave has over 35 years of experience using analytics to address audit requirements. Our second esteemed speaker is Mr. Michael Kano, my colleague, who is highly skilled with data analytics. He spent more than 20 years of international experience in developing data analytics programs and solutions with both ACL and Arbutus software. And he's done this for auditors, fraud detection professionals, SOX compliance teams, and business departments. Both Michael and Dave have a great huge array of experience and knowledge, and I'm sure that you'll find what they share today and their war stories very interesting and very educational. With that said, without any further ado, Michael, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad so many of you were able to join us today. I noticed quite a few familiar names on the list, so I'm looking forward to connecting with you once again. So on our agenda today, first thing is we'll define data quality. We instinctively understand what data quality is. There are types of data quality. There's the technical data quality. There's the actual content quality. Is it exactly within scope and so forth? And we'll look at both. We'll also address the question of why it's important. Why do we care about data quality? And it's nice to be able to put it in words, to articulate it so that we can communicate the value to others who might be skeptical, shall we say, of testing data quality. We'll also look at the sources of quality issues. There are a number of ways this can come about. And long ago, an IT specialist told me, think of the data you're receiving as the end product of a lot of processes, like your dinner. And that brought it home to me. If there's something wrong in the flow of the process, the end result is not palatable, either as data or as dinner. So we'll look at where we can have quality issues erupt. We'll also look at file-based testing. When you're receiving a data file, what's the first thing you should do in order to ascertain whether the file itself is of high technical quality? Then we'll have our wrap-up of the session today. We'll have a preview of part 2. And one of the things we're going to be previewing as well in part 2 is the use of the new version 8 of Arbutus enhanced profile command. It can tell you a lot about your data just in one single stroke. Let me take a second and show you. For instance, here we have a table of payments. If we want to profile the data, just click on the profile button. And it's going to read through about 250,000 records just in a few seconds. And here's the result. So for each field, these are all the fields at the top. It'll tell you, are there any valid issues, invalid ones? For instance, we can see here there are some invalid ones in the amounts. In the dates, there's some invalid ones as well. So right away, this thing gives you a quick snapshot of your data, so you can quickly assess the data quality. So it's a big support for anyone who's interested in maintaining control over the data quality. Great. And Dave, thank you for joining us today. Glad to have you on board, as always. I'm sure you've run into a lot of interesting data quality issues in your career. Is there any one that stands out?
I'm afraid that going through the slides and talking with you earlier on what we're going to be doing, and I'm going, oh my God, I did that wrong. Yeah, I made that mistake. So there's no single one. I can just, claim to have made all the mistakes and hopefully learn from most of them.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of the clients you've worked with or the data systems you've worked with, is there any one particular glaring quality issue? I remember you told me once about a quality issue that arose when you weren't looking for quality. And you said, well, there's a finding. So David's exactly right. No quality or low quality is a finding as well.
Absolutely. And I think, it'll come out more in the slides. I guess the biggest issue that people tend to have, I find, is with the date formats and the date fields and getting those done correctly so that you're performing proper analysis.
Great. Yeah, date fields are a minefield for anyone trying to work with coherent data across different systems, across different countries and regions and so forth. Great. And finally, we'll have a Q&A at the end. First, let's define data quality. There are a lot of attributes in terms of data quality. Reliable. In other words, it's free from bias. It includes all important aspects, so completeness, very important for auditors. In time to support decisions. Finding out 6 months after the fact that there's an issue with the data is not really a big help. And it's verifiable. So no matter who would run the test, you still find the same anomalies. Available when required. So is your data always available when you need it? And that it supports decision making. This is probably one of the most important factors in data quality. You put these all together, and what you're trying to determine is my data understandable? So all these factors combine to provide us with data that we can use and that we can understand and that we can gain insights from.
And I'd say that this is an excellent roadmap in terms of for your assessment of data quality. It's going to help you determine where some of the bumps are and whether you need to take an off-road and exit or not. So and we're going to use this as a kind of a template for the rest of the presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. And the one that I've always run into is timeliness. Whenever I worked in a large organization, they'll say, oh yeah, we can get you that data in 2 weeks or 3 months. And inevitably the border, the line, the finish line would keep moving. So it's very important to impress upon people the timeliness is of the essence. And you're right, it's a great template for moving forward. You can make a checklist based on these attributes. Okay, first poll question. These are required for your CPE credits, so please feel free to join in and answer and choose more than one if necessary.
It's going to be hard to answer the question.
Yes, it would take maybe a page or two in your case.
Oh. There we go.
Perfect. It's looking good. Everybody's giving us a response.
That's good.
Audit is winning.
Yes.
I think it's very useful as we're looking at the poll to see that, or to note that there's a variety of stakeholders here. And we're going to be talking about, how data quality impacts different stakeholders in different ways. So this is very good.
Yep, everyone has an interest in it, and they're not always identical, but they shouldn't contradict each other.
Right. We've got about 80% of folks who've responded. We'll leave up the poll for another 5 to 8 seconds, and then we'll show the results. Oh, I think.
Results are shared.
Yes, results are shared, and it looks like we've got mostly audit, 86%, and then we have IT and accounting, finance. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Dave, back to you, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Next, why is it important? That's a very good question, and it might seem obvious, but let's look at it from the point of view of the stakeholders. So, Dave, who's the top-ranked stakeholder, do you think?
Oh. It's going to be the auditors for this population that's watching, but I think they need to keep in mind that different consumers of the data are going to have their own concerns, and that all the business processes are supported by IT systems, and looking at the data not only helps you understand the business process, but how the IT system is being used. So that brings in some of the other stakeholders. Management, they use the information for decision making. So they're going to be concerned about, are we making proper financial reporting? Are our operational requirements being met? The internal control specialists will be looking at controls over, controls for financial reporting. IT, of course, and we have a number of IT folks, which is great to see on the webinar. They're interested in the input processing and reporting controls. So there's a different perspective, and audit, if they're the ones doing the analytics, they need to keep in mind that when they find data quality issues, they should be informing management. They should be informing IT. It's not just, oh, we did an audit and there was a problem with the data, but we're doing an audit of P cards, so we're not really going to comment on that. And then, of course, fraud investigators. I've seen cases where someone who's committing fraud actually uses the notion of poor data quality to try to throw you off. Like, you can't rely on that data. Our data doesn't have quality. You can't use that. So they'll use that to stop you from finding them. Whereas, in fact, what they're doing sometimes is using the lack of controls, which can be identified through the data analytics, as a way to commit fraud. So.
Yep, and data quality issues are a finding. I remember when you said that to me a few weeks ago, I thought, yeah, he's right. It is. And so it's not as though your efforts will be in vain if you do data quality testing and find anomalies. That's a finding in and of itself.
Yeah, I can't use the data because it doesn't have integrity. And you say, well, there's your first finding.
Yep. Okay, and let's see why those issues can be a problem. First, as Dave pointed out, people need to base their decisions on conclusions that are supported by data. And if you haven't got them, then your conclusions are invalid and incorrect. You lose time, and time in business is money. Revenues and costs can also be affected. If all of a sudden you issue revised financial statements a year and a half late due to data quality issues, then your stock price is going to suffer, the reputation of your people, their credibility, and so on.
You know, when I look at all of these, and they're all very individually, they're very important. But if I break down the analytics process into three very, very simple steps, I want to get the data, I want to understand the data, and then I want to use the data. So I'm talking primarily from, let's say, an audit perspective that I'll automatically just head to because I've been doing that for so many years. But for any consumer of the data, those are the things they want to do. Now, how do I spend my time? I probably spend 20% of my time getting the data and extracting the data, accessing and extracting the data, 20%. 40% is spent understanding and validating the data and my understanding, validating my understanding of the data as well. And then only 40% is spent building, running, and validating again the analytics and exporting the results. Now, this will vary. If it's a system I've used a whole bunch, then the extraction, maybe I have a standard routine that I run, and it's very, very quick. And I don't have to do as much to understand the data because I've already done that. But if you're going new, you talked about the time. Yes, it's going to take some time. So you need to plan for those. That 20, 40, 40 seems like a valid sort of estimate. And if you don't spend the time at the front end, the 20% and the 40% getting and validating, then you know your results are not going to be worthwhile.
Exactly. Okay. That sets up the second poll question. How do you deal with data that lacks quality? So from your experiences, if you go back to the owner of the data, the provider, fix the data yourself, ignore the issues.
This kind of assumes you've actually run into data problems, but most of us have.
Well, my rule is if you haven't found a problem, you're not looking hard enough. and sometimes the issue might not be material. Someone making a judgment might say, well, for the purposes of this audit, these anomalous transactions are not material, so we can proceed with the audit without that. But that should leave open a second channel for you to address those anomalies. Why are they there? Separate from the material transactions they might be looking at. Because someday a material transaction might come down the same channel that caused those little anomalies. Those little anomalies could be precursors to someone testing the system to see how much of a fraud can I get away with here. And we've seen that happen before. They start with stealing Post-it notes. I remember back when they used to be expensive and people would steal them from the stationery cupboard, all the way to borrowing a company car for a jaunt somewhere. Or taking interviewees to your favorite club. These things do happen, and it's people are testing the boundaries.
Absolutely, and as you said earlier, and as I alluded to, you know, data quality has different stakeholders, and if you're looking at this from an audit perspective, those are the people you need to be talking to when you identify. It's not just affecting your audit. There's wider implications that need to be dealt with.
Oh yeah.
Just want to let the audience know we'll leave up the poll for another 5 seconds and then we'll close it and share the results. You have about 80% of the folks who've responded.
Oh, good.
Yeah, on this one, I wish there was a all of the above option.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mind you, you can select all that apply. So I guess that's the same way as saying all of above.
All right, so we've got our results now. This is the outcome.
Yeah, so
thank you, everyone.
You know, identifying the sources of quality issues, it's certainly a good practice. You want to know, you know, audit always wants to know the why. You know, what's the cause? Because you can't make a recommendation if you don't understand what the why is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, David. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. So the question always comes up, is poor data quality still usable? In short, if you can't read the data and it's not relevant to the scope, no, that's a hard no. You just don't use it at all. There's a maybe, of course. You can adjust your other objectives in your scope. You can isolate the problem data, as we mentioned earlier, and use incomplete data, but not letting go of the channel that created the problem data, making sure you verify that and see exactly why that happened. And then, yes, if you can cleanse the data and use it for IT control testing, so there's a nice way to turn it around and actually kill two birds with one stone. You might be doing a business audit, and then the quality of the IT provided data might be not usable, but then it's a finding. And so we can go back to IT with that finding.
Yeah, and I've experienced all of these. I mean, and we're going to talk about some of the ways you can deal with these, but I remember one time early in my career, I asked for some data and they said they'd produce a report for me. And I thought, great, and I should get it within a week. And I was really happy. And about a week later, 10 boxes of printout arrived at my desk. So I had a 6-foot high stack of paper that I could use for my analysis. It was really tough. There's another time where so I couldn't read the data. Well, I could read the data, but I could only do it manually. Another time where we were bringing stuff off the mainframe and there were compressed numeric fields and they converted the data to ASCII so that I could read it on the PC, but they didn't uncompress the data first. So it was totally useless data. I couldn't read it. Another time was just not relevant to the scope. I asked for the data and they gave me the previous complete fiscal year, whereas I was trying to do an audit, year-to-date audit. So I had data that was not relevant to my audit objectives and scope.
They were testing
maybe, yeah. Well, and I have to, like I say, it was my fault. And like I said, we're going to get to how you can get around these things or prevent them to some extent. I've seen lots of times where out of 500,000 or 1 million transactions, there's 100 or so that are just, there's something wrong with them. And you just isolate those and deal with them manually.
Yeah, and we'll be looking at some techniques that you can use in data analysis applications that can make the data usable for some of those problematic data sets.
And I had another one where I was doing advances. So I was doing an audit of advances. And in my mind, that meant travel advances, but we didn't specifically say travel advances. And there was a whole other set of advances that were given. And we were halfway through the analysis and we realized that when somebody was talking about the total dollar values, 60 million, and we only had 30, there was something wrong. And we realized, there's a whole other set. So, could we use the data we had? Yes, we just had to modify the scope. We went back to the audit committee and said, yeah, the scope of this audit will be travel advances. So we didn't lose everything basically.
Well, let's see exactly what the process is of getting data, acquiring data, and where you can get quality issues. Typically, someone will make a request and the data provider will extract it from the system, if it's SAP or Oracle or one of those wonderful ERPs, transfer it to a spreadsheet so that you could read it, zip it up, and upload it to a server on the network, or even email it to you if it's small enough. You download it, and you look at it, and you heave a sigh of sadness and say, let me request that again.
Yeah. Now,
this is something we've all seen happen. And anytime you process data, extract it, transfer it, convert it, or upload, there's a tiny, tiny possibility that something could happen to the data. Data is not set in stone. It's really just a bunch of zeros and ones, and they can be interfered with. So just keep that in mind. The shorter the chain, the better. Oh,
I want to make a couple of comments on that. If you can jump back for a second.
Sure.
We talk about the sources, or I guess we're going to come to the sources later. This was just the process. I'll withdraw my comments and allow us to continue to the poll. Sorry.
Okay. Poll question 3, how do you get your data? Ideally, of course, you'd just click in through an ODBC connector and download the data directly yourself.
Well,
But we don't
I'd
live in an
question
ideal
whether
world.
that's ideal.
Hmm.
I mean, depending on the complexity of the information system, you're going to want to have those experts there that can help you and maybe produce a report for you. So I think there's a lot of depends on this, and that's why it'd be interesting to see what people are doing in order to get their data. How do they get their data? I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah, endless meetings with the data provider, swearing I wouldn't do anything with it when I was conducting some audits.
Yeah,
We've got about almost 80% of the folks who've responded, and surprisingly, direct access to system is not one of the lower ones. Right, kind of expected that not to be the second highest. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's good progress. I remember when I first started in this business, no one would help you get the data. You would have to beg and borrow and pledge your firstborn and everything, and then they might get it to you. So, but that's changed a lot. I think with more and more technical people in the field. Yes.
Yes, it has.
I agree. That's very interesting. Both that and even customized reports, because allowing you to run your own reports and customize them, depending on what you mean by customizing. If you're allowed to build your own reports, that can have an impact on the system. So you need to be very careful when you're doing the direct access and when you're building your own reports from scratch.
Always add a filter, I would say. Don't ask for all the data because you'll get millions of records and something will crash.
Yeah.
Well, good news then. We're having good feedback here. Oh, what are the sources of data quality issues? Miscommunication of requirements, data input, processing, and reporting. We saw the extraction, the conversion, and data entry. Let's not forget, someone had to enter that data somewhere at some day. It didn't just happen there by itself. Transmitting the data, importing the data into your application, manual edits, data definition. The metadata is often separate, or should be separate from the content itself. Is your data defined properly? So what's the evidence that there's been some data quality issues?
Sorry, can we go back on that one?
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, I'm going to say that, I've experienced all of these in terms of where data quality issues were related. Transmission, something simple like a carriage return line feed is added to the data as it's transmitted, and that changes the record length. So you're not anticipating that. Conversion from mainframe format to PC ASCII, and now we've got Unicode and things like that. So there's also that issue. Data definition. I checked the data dictionary and it said there was only 2 decimals in the unit price. And, well, they hadn't updated the data dictionary and there was 3. So all of my unit costs were out by a factor of 10, which is, significant, because then you start reporting on this. If you haven't gone to that extra effort to validate your reporting, and your results are total garbage, and you lose all your credibility.
Yep. All in there. Good. So the evidence of data quality erosion, missing records. So you're testing for completeness. Is every transaction accounted for, every department, every employee? Are there too many records? Is your scope correctly defined? Are there duplicate records in it? Have your fields shifted? You mentioned the carriage return line feed that might have intruded into the data. It would push a field over to the right or to the left, depending on how it was situated. Unreasonable values. If you've got one value of about $10 million and the next highest value is under 100,000, something's gone wrong. The dates are outside of scope, so being precise is very important in terms of your request. Skewed records, again, that's where you might have an issue with the record length. blank and invalid entries. Some fields are designed to have blanks. They're supposed to allow for blanks, for instance, a comments field. Others need to be populated. Is there strong input validation to require valid and valid content to be entered only? Incorrect, invalid formatting, invalid characters in the data, invalid entries, and gaps in sequential data.
Yeah, and not all of these are created equally. They're not all of the same importance. We talk about blank or invalid entries. Sometimes that's fine, but if it's a mandatory field like the vendor name in an invoice, and you've got a blank vendor name, which I've seen, then I think that's pretty severe. Shifted fields, that can happen when we have like a new field or the field length changes and you haven't taken that into consideration. You weren't told that. The missing ones, the biggest one I run into, and I fall prey to this over and over and over again, is I'll be running a standard report and I'll forget that there's a maximum number of records that will be reported as a default. And you've got to go in and change that. And then when I look at the data and I say, oh, I got 50,000 records. Exactly. Oh, rats. That's because there's a 50,000 record limit. Or when they dumped it to Excel, especially back in the old days, but even now, oh, I only got 1 million records. That's because of the limitation in Excel. So everything else was done correctly, but you forgot one little piece.
Yep, the limits in the application that it passed through. That's why whenever I ask for data, I always say, don't let it go anywhere near a spreadsheet. So don't even keep them on the same laptop.
Yeah.
So miscommunication is the first one. If you just ask for all AP transactions between April and June, including all important fields, there's a lot of ambiguity. When you're saying between April and June, well, the month of May is between April and June. So are you talking about just the month of May, or do you include April and June? What fields are important? Well, they're all important to some point, a degree or another. So a better phrased one would be something like all AP payments and reversals between specific dates, inclusive, including the following fields, providing a list of them. And then my favorite, the output should be in a tab delimited text file, and no point should it pass through a spreadsheet or be opened in a spreadsheet application. And we'll look at reasons for that later, but spreadsheets are, or can be, a source of data quality issues.
And yeah, and it's not you say can be, and it's not the only place. I mean, sometimes you're getting files that been extracted. So there's the extraction process, the transmission process, and then maybe brought into Excel, and then converted to a CSV. And suddenly you realize at the end, you get it. And there's data quality issues. And it's like, where did they come from? You talked about a dinner. And, the final thing that's being served to you doesn't taste good. Is it because of the inputs? Is it because of the processing? Is it, what's the problem? So you want the data to be as close to source as possible. And that will help to reduce the introduced data quality issues.
So we should invite the cook to dinner just to make sure that the cook is eating what we're eating. Okay, so
no, we should grow our own. We should grow our own stuff, and so it goes right from the garden to your plate. So you've reduced that. You're as close to the source as possible.
One conversion issue that we've all come across is the dropping of leading zeros in ID numbers. If you have an ID number that is just a label, it's not a value to be calculated with, but it consists only of numerics. If you drop it into some applications, it'll just become a numeric and it'll drop the leading zeros. Conversion of dates to numerics, and this happens frequently.
Yes.
You'll have a date, but in your application or in your spreadsheet, it'll end up as a number. There's a very easy fix to that, because those numbers that begin with around 45,000, that indicates that it's the number of days since January 1, 1900. And there's an easy fix for that.
Yeah.
If it removes alphas from an alphanumeric field, so you have 91A, 52B, and you're left with the numbers. So there's a bias to converting things to numbers, I think.
Sometimes when there's an alpha in the field and it's treated as a numeric field, it's going to say the field's 0. It's going to say it's an invalid number, so it'll report it as 0.
Yes, exactly. text fields containing delimiters like tabs, character returns, and line feeds. Insertion of blank lines in Excel. If you have a spreadsheet and there's a blank line somewhere in it, only the data up to the blank line will be considered.
What I find there is quite often at the bottom of an Excel file, I'll get like 10, 20, 30,000 blank lines. And, when I'm bringing the data in, I have to make sure I'm careful to remove those because they're going to affect all my analysis. And you talked about the stripping off of the leading zeros. If you're relating files, you've got a parent file and a child file, and perhaps they were handled differently and brought in differently. One, they got stripped off the leading zeros, and one they didn't. Now, when you do the relationship, you're going to have a lot of unrelated parent. They have no child. So like a vendor number that doesn't have a vendor name in the master file. So.
Yeah, so here's the expiry date that somehow came in as a numeric. If you want to convert that to the actual date, all you have to do is create a computed field that adds that number in the expiry date field to January 1, 1900, and everything will be fine from then on. So don't despair. Don't go back to IT. Try to fix it this way first by creating a computed field. Data entry, inconsistent source data formats. There's one client I did a big project for. They were treating some of the data in Dublin early in the day, and then later in the day it was be treated in California. Well, guess what? They use different date formats. So that's where you have weak or non-existent input validation. And that's a spreadsheet is great for many things, but you can't really, you can build input validation to a spreadsheet, but it's tedious to have to redo it every single time.
I think the other thing here too is it points to a weakness in controls. So you want to be talking to the system owner and the IT folks to say, hey, should there be a control on this field? Because we're getting in different formatted dates. Then the question is, so what? Like, what's the impact of this? So what? Well, if there's no input validation, it could be possible to enter dates that are not appropriate for the fiscal year. So I might enter 2003 when I meant to enter 2023. And we're not only not checking the format, but we're not checking the validity of the date. So I've got something that if it was an invoice, it's 20 years overdue. And the automatic interest calculator could kick in and pay interest on an invoice that's 20 years late, I should say.
Oh, well, good for the stock price. And there's the ones where the leading zeros are dropped. So if you see a vendor number that's only 4 digits, yet all the others are 5, there's a good chance the leading zero was dropped. Manual edits, sometimes it's inadvertent. You had a fat finger day and all of a sudden the numbers have been off by a factor of 1,000 and you try to re-input it. Sometimes there's deliberate editing because people have been found in areas of high confidentiality that someone's been playing with the data deliberately to cover up a fraud or to investigate if a fraud is possible. So anytime you sort the data or you format it, copy, paste, or delete, you're manually editing the data. So it's a good idea to have the data in a format that is really a read-only, designed for read-only by your application.
Yeah, and I always keep the original copy of the data separate if I have to be in a package that can edit it. So I want to be careful because, I've sorted an Excel spreadsheet on one column and not included the others in the sort and then saved the file. You're lost. You don't have to go back to IT. So I can go back to my original sort. You talk about inadvertent or deliberate editing. This is maybe not quite the same thing, but I ran across one where the AP clerks were deliberately adding a period at the end of the invoice number anytime the system said it was a duplicate invoice, because they were told that, just look and make sure you have an original, and they did, because there were more than one original sent by the vendor. Make sure you have an original, and if you do, just add a period at the end, because then the system won't see it as a duplicate and everything will be fine. Well, that worked great, except for we were paying duplicates. And somebody took advantage of that because they started introducing duplicates. So a fraudster took advantage of that weakness.
Yeah, that's a good example of how a seemingly innocuous directive for management can actually give cover to fraud practitioners. So
less of a directive from management, more of a here's how we'll deal with it.
you
know, like the
nothing in
the
writing.
the AP supervisor. Oh yeah. Just put a period at the end. It's okay.
And then metadata, which we talked about earlier. Sometimes there are errors in data definition, particularly pertaining to the record length and the fields. Each field has a length and a position. It has a data type. It has a certain format and has a name. So you always want to make sure that your metadata compared to the original application's metadata, that they match up.
Now I've had some, just back a bit for a sec. I've had some issues with metadata in the sense where I'm getting the same data, let's say monthly or something. So I'm expecting it to be identical in its format. And there's some problems. Some of the standard reports, like in SAP, if you produce a report and this month the amount never goes above 10,000, then the report actually shrinks the width of the amount field. And the next,
dynamic.
So you build your format based on, let's say 8, and the next month there's one for $1 million. Well, you've truncated now that off, and you're not going to get the right results. CSV files, again, the same thing. You get a CSV file and you bring it in, your software is going to look to say, what's the largest field, the length of each field, what's the largest length for each field? And it creates that import for it. You bring down data the next time and it's got a larger field, and again, you're going to be truncating some of the data. And the one that I make the mistake all the time is sometimes the metadata, the names of the fields are really quite long, and I'm trying to shorten them up, and then I shorten them up, and then I'm dealing with IT, and I'm talking about a field, I call it, A, and they're going, we don't have a field called A. It's like, oh yeah, what the heck was that field? It was called A, not including taxes, but including, it had a name that was 32 characters long. So
let me guess, it was SAP.
Yeah. Just
okay. Our final question: what issues do you encounter obtaining data? This could be a long list.
Yeah, and I've, again, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with the business owners, you're dealing with the IT people. They have priorities, they have operational requirements. You
end up
have
with
to take all those into account.
Yeah. Yeah, you might end up with a situation where it doesn't have to be good, it just has to be on Tuesday. So how are we doing on the poll?
We're doing good. We've got about 3/4 of the folks responding. So I'm going to give it a couple more seconds and then we'll end and share the results.
Great.
Okay, we've got about 80%, so we'll go ahead and share the results.
Yeah, so taking long to obtain, I can understand that. If it was a brand new system and an audit was coming up, and I knew there was an audit coming up, because I would look at the audit plan for the year. I supported all the auditors, and I'd say, oh, they're going to be doing an audit on this. I'll talk to them ahead of time while they're on another audit, and I'll say, hey, by the way, this one that's coming up that you've been assigned to, are you guys going to be doing some analytics in the following areas? So I make and if they say yes, I know that I need that time to start going and getting the data now. I used to say if it's a brand new system that I've never ever seen before and it's complicated, it could take 6 months to get the authority to access the data, to understand the data, and to get it ready. And that's because I also had other things to do. So you need to plan, basically.
Okay, let's take a look at some best practices for identifying data quality issues. There's content and structure, 2 different levels of testing. So is the content relevant? is it consistent with the scope, accessible, is it complete, and does not contain duplicate records. So you can easily use a command like duplicates in Arbutus to check and see, do I have any two records or more that are exactly identical to each other? And you can very easily test that very quickly. Same thing with completeness, record counts, and so forth, using statistics commands and things like that. And using statistics on the date field to make sure that they're in scope and that the scope is complete.
Sometimes the data that's coming in is in a report format or something. So there's subtotals and headers that you need to remove and stuff. And that's not too bad, but you need to be careful you need to look at what you've removed, not just what you've kept.
Yes.
What you've kept looks nice. So we were doing an audit of payroll for a large construction project. And because of the structure of the data, the auditor had removed all of the overtime records.
Oh,
and
good.
And we were, because they had a different format, so they didn't meet the filter. So you have to be careful. And I always say, look at what you've taken out.
Yep. When you get your data, make sure to check the source metadata. Oracle and SAP tables, the source metadata is pretty much transparent. So just compare what you've got in your application to the metadata in terms of type, length, and format. And here's an old example, the famous SAP BSEG file. You've got your data type in one column and the length in others. And so it's a good idea if you're pulling in this data to compare the two to what you have in your application, your data analytics application.
And if you're getting...
Sorry?
I was going to say, and if you're doing this on a regular basis, you still want to check your data for data quality and to make sure that you've defined it properly, because fields change. The length of fields change.
Yep. Here's an example where someone has input the format of the expected data as month, day, year, but the data is actually year, month, day. And so the result is you get a blank field. So it's easy enough to change. You just go back and you change the format in the data definition to match the format of the physical data. So it should be year dash month dash day. So if you ever get a blank column of dates, it's probably because of that. That's the first place you should look. If you have shifted fields, well, all of a sudden the fields have moved over to the next field. That's an indication you might have two tabs delimiting the payment date column after record number 42. And so one way to fix that is to create a conditional computed field that reads the payment date as the payment date, and then reads the adjacent record as the payment date, where the payment date is blank.
Yeah, and I've seen that where you don't have a field qualifier, and maybe it's comma separated values, but there's commas in the middle of a description field or a free-form text field, and you need to say, oh, by the way, there's double quote delimiter around fields as well.
Yeah, one great solution to that is when you pull in the data from a delimited file, if you've encountered shifted fields, import the data again, but keep it as pure text, and then use the compact function to remove multiple instances of the tab. So you can re-export the data with a single tab delimiter in between the two fields, and then re-import it. It's tedious, but it works. Or you could go back to the data provider and say, there's an issue here. Then you have skewed records where something's gone wrong. The primary source of this is the length.
The record length. Yeah, the record length has just changed.
Yeah. So
it looks terrible, but it's an easy fix.
Yep. So this is what you've got, and don't lose heart. Just go to the edit table, table options, or whatever it has in your application, and change the field length until the data is lined up nice and clean. You do that, and there you go. You're back in business.
Yeah. I've had many a call saying, help. I'm going, oh, this is easy.
Yes. but make it last an hour so that you can get a full feed. So, okay, so that's the file-based testing that should be conducted if you notice any anomalies. And so if you have any questions about some of these anomalies and how to address them, feel free to reach out to myself or Dave. Be very happy to help you. And Dave, he's contributed his knowledge to the IA guidance on data analytics. So there's quite a lot. It's actually grown. I remember when I first started in this business, there was maybe one sentence where the use of data analytics could be considered. So yeah. Very waffly there. Lots of waffles with our breakfast, sir. But now it's whole chapters and lots of guidelines, which is great. Any of these you'd like to comment on, Dave?
No, I think the important point here that you've made is it continues to evolve, and auditors have to continue to evolve and you know, keep up with the standards, keep up with the professional practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this is great that it's codified by the IIA and ISACA and so forth, because then if someone says, oh, we don't need to conduct data analytics on data quality, well, yes, we do, because, and there's your defense.
Or if somebody says, you don't really need to get this data and you don't have the authority to get this data, now you can say, well, this is what the Institute of Internal Auditors says that we should be doing. So, and
it's in the audit charter. So
yeah.
I had to wave the audit charter flag a few times, and it eventually worked. But people said, what's the audit charter? How do we know you didn't make this up? I said, well, why would I make it up? But okay, so that brings us to the end of the content for part one. Next Wednesday, our agenda for part two is we'll do a quick review of part one, very quick. We'll look at field-based quality testing. What are the best practices there? And that really gets into the nitty-gritty of some of the functions and functionality that we've been discussing. And what are the best practices for quality risk mitigation? You want to minimize the possibility of having risk intrude on what you're doing. We'll have a wrap-up, and we'll also make sure to take a look at the enhanced profile command that can do a lot of data quality analysis for you in one easy step.
Yeah, so you can automate it.
Yes. And we'll have a Q&A as well at the end of that session. Any questions?
I hope we have some questions.
Behrooz, have we received
Thank you, gentlemen. Yes, we have received some questions. One of the questions, that's an interesting one. You know, it says recognizing good versus poor data depends on the analyst's knowledge and experience. How does one kind of account for that variation from person to person?
You know, a lot of times when auditors are assigned an audit, to be honest, I found a lot of times I knew nothing about that area. So the first thing I wanted to start was looking at the data to try to find, define what's actually happening within the system and how is the IT system supporting the process that we're looking at. And that's where, when you're doing things like classify and you're doing statistics and you're running all these commands to understand the data, that's when you start seeing some of these errors, these data quality issues, like a simple sort on the date field. And you go, wow, I've got a date here that says it's from 1904 and it's the date on the invoice. You know
Talk about
and the anomalies will pop up because you'll say there's only one date that's outside of our fiscal year range. Well, I don't need to be an expert in whatever that application system is or that business process is to say there's something unusual about this, or a date 50 years in the future. Like, no, you weren't born in 2025. Like, there's no way. So I think you have to keep an open mind when you're looking at it, and let the data tell the story. Try to avoid the assumptions that you know what the data should look like, and look at what it's really telling you.
Yeah, in one organization I worked in, they asked me to draw up a list of all the data quality tests that they should be running for every single audit that involved data. And eventually that led to a script that ran for several minutes that did a lot of this testing and identification of anomalies. And they mandated that you must run this test on every single data set that you receive. And they would ask for additional tests for very specialized functions. If there was a department that was involved with overseas credits, they would have to have additional tests built into that. So, but once you have the basis for conducting your tests and it's codified as part of the department's audit plan, then it's easy to pass on to someone. All they need is someone to explain to them, what is an inconsistent date format, or what's ASCII, what's EBCDIC, what's Unicode, and work from there. But as long as it's codified and documented clearly and comprehensively, then that's all you need to pass on to the person. If they can read it, then they should be able to implement it.
The other thing is, I used to talk at the beginning of an audit. I would talk with the system owner, and I'd say, which IT controls do you rely on for your business process? So I was doing procurement audit one time, and the person said, well, we rely on the fact that when you enter an invoice over 25,000, it has to reference a purchase order. I said, okay, so blank purchase orders for amounts over 25 would be a data quality issue. And they say, oh, absolutely. And what else? Well, there has to be a vendor, there has to be a this, there has to be a that. The second thing I'd like to say is not all data quality issues are of equal concern. So I was doing some HR work, and I was told ahead of time that the HR system, that 65% of the records had an error. And you sort of go, 65%? Like, that's just insane. How can you? Well, it was rarely in a field that really mattered.
Oh, okay.
Maybe it was in the spelling of the dependent's third name that there was an error. And so, like, what does that impact? You still have a dependent listed, you still have their age, you still, you have all the other stuff, but there was an error there. So when you're doing an audit, you want to look at the risk. And Michael, you've talked about this before about, what is the risk associated with the business process that we're trying to measure and mitigate. So, and which data, which controls will mitigate those risks, and which data is related to the controls that will mitigate the risk. And that's the data you want to focus on.
Yep.
So that will help you, you do a stepped approach to, if you've never been in the area before, you don't understand the data, you don't understand the business process, and you're trying to learn, then you go back to what's your audit objective? What are the risks? What are the controls? What are the analytics we want to run to test the controls, and what data do we require? And that data becomes the pieces that have to have good integrity, good quality.
Gentlemen, this is great conversation. I hate to be the person to end it. We have about a minute left. Just want to thank you both for sharing your knowledge and the war stories. I'm sure they were very educational and interesting for everyone. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to be with us. Michael, if you wouldn't mind just going to the next slide, please. Just a reminder for everyone, our next session is next Wednesday, 15th of November at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And as well, you will receive the recording as well as the slides. And if you have any questions, please follow up with us, and we will make sure we follow up with you with any questions that we missed. Thank you again, everyone.
One point I'd like to make on this slide, my antivirus software, when I downloaded the presentation, wiped out the links to email and LinkedIn. So if yours does that, there, it's still there. You can still see it. You're just going to have to cut and paste.
Yep. Great. Well, thanks very much for joining us today, Dave. And thanks very much, Bahruz, for conducting us. So, and if you have any questions, as Bahruz mentioned, feel free to contact any of us. We'll be more than happy to help you.
And hope to see you next week.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you, everyone.